This is Energy Frontiers edition for the week with me, Justina Okechukwu. We begin this package with the headline energy news. The International Energy Agency on Wednesday predicted that the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions in China is expected to boost global oil demand by 1.9 million barrels to a record 101.7 million barrels per day in the current year. The agency's report follows a different projection from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, which kept world oil demand growth for 2023 unchanged at 2.2 million barrels per day, with the OECD growing by 0.3 million barrels per day and non-OECD countries the demand forecast at 1.9 million barrels per day. The African Energy Chamber believes that Western groups have targeted African energy sector and are working hard to make lawsuits against financing the growing and thriving oil and gas industry on the continent. The leading energy advocacy group based in South Africa maintains that Africans should be allowed to decide for themselves and has vowed to oppose and confront any action to prevent the development of the East African crude oil pipeline and the fight against energy poverty. In the meantime, Uganda's cabinet has approved the construction license for the proposed East African crude oil pipeline, subject to conditions including securing all necessary consents and permits. Officials said construction will start on the pipeline in November this year due to land acquisition issues. Camel, a joint venture between Turkish Car Powership and Japanese Mitsu OSK Lines, has reached a $71 million agreement with Japanese banks to finance its first floating storage and regasification unit in Senegal. The unit is expected to supply regasified liquefied natural gas to a car powership floating power plant known as Powership. And that was a snapshot of your energy news headlines. When we return, top policymakers and industry heavyweights met to create a nexus of energy security and climate action at the Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi. More on this in just a moment. Welcome back to the program. The US-based think tank known as Atlantic Council hosted its annual Global Energy Forum about a week ago in Abu Dhabi. The meeting brought together the world's top energy and foreign policy decision makers looking to set energy agenda for the year ahead and examine the longer-term geopolitical and geo-economic implications of the changing energy system. The two-day high-profile global forum earmarked key conversations. But let's take a brief from Damilola Ogunbiyi, the special representative of the UN Secretary General and the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All.
I mean, it's important to understand the energy needs and what the energy is used for. That is very fundamental. So just from my engineering background, it's really important to understand how energy systems work, what it means for baseload, what types of energy you need, and then to understand how people want to develop. There's no scenario where you can actually succeed without having energy development and climate together. And that's what we've been trying to do in saying that, when you're telling countries, because this is a whole shift of an economic change in countries, you have to go and say, what exactly is your energy transition pathway? So if you take my country, Nigeria made it very clear. We needed to uplift 100 million people out of poverty, and we needed to uplift our industrial base. And if you can do it clean, that's your problem, but figure it out. So we need to take in consideration what the country wants. What we do a lot of time is take these regional approaches to a very localized problem. There's a vast difference from the energy transition plan in Nigeria to our neighbors in Ghana, to Kenya, but you say, Africa as a whole. Africa is full of different countries and different nuances. Even in my country, what happens in northern Nigeria is different from what happens in southern Nigeria. So you have to understand that. That's the just and the energy part of it. And you also understand this takes a long time. The Nigerian president at COP 26 announced they will get to net zero at 2060, not 2050. Because when you looked at the transport sector, the industrial sector, the oil and gas sector, it just wasn't possible. So being realistic about what a country has to do is important. And lastly, I have to touch on the finance again, because for a country like Nigeria to get to net zero with perfect policies, perfect political stability between now and 2060 will cost in the regions of $1.9 trillion. So we need to really be realistic when we talk about the numbers of what you're asking countries that are easily spending 80% of their revenue on debt servicing, on interest-only debt servicing, how exactly they're going to do it. So I don't know the solutions, but I'm excited to find how we're going to crack this. But this financing issue is really at the heart of the entire energy transition. I mean, like I said, it's 800 million without access, but it's actually 1 billion people in energy poverty because you have electricity doesn't mean you have it constantly. And what those figures don't talk about is the 2.4 billion people that don't have access to clean cooking as well. So when we talk about energy, we have to talk about both. I mean, the greatest risk is leaving those people behind. Is continuing with growing demands of energy elsewhere and leaving those people behind. And that's why energy efficiency is just so important. And we've seen it around Europe when people got high energy bills, they started using less. And that's the thinking that, in developing countries, there's hardly any waste because people don't have enough to use in the first place. So we really need to come together and look at what is the social return on investment by giving power to these people, affects GDP, affects jobs. It creates whole industries if we do focus as well with our efforts for places that don't have it. It's also important because if those people get electricity the way the rest of the world has, using very dirty fuels, we're going to go back in about 2 decades again saying we want to transition again, and we don't have to do that.
Another key highlight of the Atlantic Council's Energy Conference was a panel that drilled into what's next for Africa's energy transition. Speaking on that panel were representatives from the Republic of Senegal, Africa Green Coal Group, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and Distributed Power Africa. Listen here.
So DFC is the U.S. government's development finance institution, and our job is to basically get it done, to get deals across the finish line. We have about a $10 billion energy portfolio globally, $10 billion portfolio in Africa, not just all energy. And in the last few years, we've done about $5 billion. So the numbers are great to talk about the numbers. What really matters is, are you getting the deals across the finish line? And what it comes down to, it's working with people like Amadou. And so DFC, for example, it comes down to the individuals. It comes down to the operating environment of where you are, making sure that there's actual political will to get things done. We can hear about all of these announcements of the billions that are needed, or the trillions that are needed, new initiatives. None of them mean a thing if you're not putting points on the scoreboard. And honestly, in the energy sector in Africa, not a lot's moving right now. What you're seeing is a lot more deals going towards commercial and industrial. And what is that? Why are people doing that? Because they're having too much difficulty working with governments. Government can't offer the guarantees that they need to offer. Governments are trying to renegotiate power purchasing agreements. So the general investment climate in a lot of the countries is just not good for a whole variety of reasons.
When you come to the table to be a provider, to expand access, who do you bring to the table, and how are you navigating that?
Thank you, Kelsey. I think I'm based in South Africa, and so by now we would have had 2 to 3 blackouts. If that happened in this place, that means we would have had a 2-hour of no conference. Now, this is what's happening on a daily basis. A market of that size, which is probably one of the largest economies in the continent, certainly cannot even afford 1 hour of load shedding. So you can imagine the entire nation coming to a standstill for an hour, let alone 6 hours. So that's why I call it the epicenter of the crisis. Now, it's slightly different in the sense that the rest of the world needs to worry about the carbon conversation. But when you are in a complete blackout and there are no electrons flowing, the problem is slightly different. The urgency is slightly different. So what needs to happen? First and foremost, we need to get the lights on before we can have any other conversation. But the solution has to be probably a lot more pragmatic than talking about, oh, we're going to build X amount of gigawatt of solar. Yeah, you will. Probably in the next 5 to 7 years, they'll come to stream, but we'll be dead by then because we have got 6-hour load shedding on a daily basis. So I think the challenge to the world is, to the global world, is how do we find a short-term solution to keep the lights working, while at least we are slowly decarbonizing and improving the quality of energy.
Can you talk about how you're tapping into the opportunity and how replicable the model is that you're building?
Thank you very much. I think our model is actually short and long term, both. So I live in Zambia. We have 12 hours load shedding at the moment. And in effect, I completely agree with you, Norman. It's a perfect storm. We've been arguing something for quite a while as Greenco, which is that there are 3 key constraints to bringing and scaling up renewable energy in particular, which is our focus, even though we fully agree, as a renewable-only company, that we need gas and other sources of power as well. At the end of the day, it's baseload that is required. And if we don't plan the absorption of intermittency in the sub-Saharan African continent appropriately, we will experience challenges to the grid of significant proportions and much bigger than Europe, what it experienced last year. And we saw what the consequences were on the power prices. But anyway, going back to the challenges that we are trying to avoid is to move away from the single buyer model, which is the single buyer of being the national utility. So we were set up as SADC's newest private sector buyer and supplier and trader of electricity. We were set up in collaboration with the government of Zambia, but we are also active in Namibia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa.
Yeah, I want to talk more about this theme of building appetite and generating appetite. And Minister Ha, I want to start with you on this. Africa accounts for the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room that, at less than 4%. What kind of a bargaining chip is that going into COP28?
Thank you very much. But I mean, at the same time, we need to be very realistic on what is happening today around the world. If you are a country that has an IPP with fossil fuel today, it's very difficult for you to find an MDB that will finance you.
Yeah.
Even if the MDB policy maybe has not changed, yeah, we'll do gas, we'll do fossil fuel, we'll do heavy fuel, but the reality is that chances are you may not get your financing, or it will take you years before you get financing. But if you're having a renewable energy project, whether it's solar, wind, or you're doing green hydrogen, or you are doing even hydro, the appetite is much, much higher. And what we are noticing today is that the cost of renewable has gone down so much that the green premium has come down drastically as well, which means then if I am a government, today it's more realistic for me to focus on what is the maximum renewable energy that I can have on my grid, what amount of investment I need to upgrade the grid to so that I can absorb that new actually renewable energy, and what is the cost of storage if I mix all of that to try to get a kind of base load.
Can you talk about the appetite for financing gas projects from where you sit, and how does the CapEx actually currently compare to developing hydro, wind, and solar?
Yeah. So DFC, this is going to come as a surprise to many because there's this perception out there that other than what I'm going to tell you is DFC takes a technology agnostic approach. We finance gas. We finance gas in Africa. We finance the Sika project
But it's now,
in Sierra Leone.
It's new.
What's that?
The gas thing.
No. We financed Sika just last year.
Okay.
But what we don't find, and I'm going to disagree with you. Solar's not easy.
Yeah.
You know, you've got all of these solar panels that are manufactured using polysilicon that comes from the Xinjiang province of China, which is being manufactured using slave labor, basically, or all these human rights abuses. That makes it very difficult for us to justify a lot of our financing in the solar space as well, because we have to make sure that the supply chain is a clean supply chain as well. It makes it challenging. This is the reason that DFC did a $500 million financing for a US company for solar in India to produce thin film panels which don't use polysilicon. So the whole entire supply chain, every sector is challenging. And one of the reasons that I'm here is I'm looking for projects for us to finance. I'm struggling to find bankable projects. That's the caveat. The projects have to be bankable.
Yeah, just I think to add to that, the distributed power for SMEs and some industries, you know, a lot of opportunities. You can make money, is great, but the distributed power for, let's say, on the retail side, the pay as you go, we've seen the challenges that we have had because the populations often don't even believe this is real power. You know, we've seen that in many countries. Just to come back on the energy mix, I'm not saying that everybody should do 100% renewable energy and you got to throw away the gas and the other technologies. What I'm saying is that you need to prioritize. If you can achieve with renewable energy, storage with other hydro or storage batteries, and you achieve the right cost, the cheapest cost possible, that as a government, I believe that should be your priority because you're achieving the climate goals, but at the same time, you're becoming independent and you are using your natural resources that are unlimited. And if you have gas, for example, in your country, export the gas because today you can find gas buyers.
That was a panel from the just concluded Global Energy Forum organized by the Atlantic Council in Abu Dhabi. After the break, we take a quick look at how green hydrogen is finding its way into Africa's energy transition agenda. This is Energy Frontiers. Welcome back. I am Justina Okechukwu. Africa continues to look for ways to meet its massive energy demand, and green hydrogen is gradually being used to strike a balance as potential technology by some African countries while on the path to net zero. According to German Economic Development Agency known as GIZ, producing carbon-neutral green hydrogen could create opportunities for exporting countries such as Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Angola to transition to a sustainable and green energy and fuel sector. Here is my chat with Duke Benjamin, the head of the climate and energy sector at GIZ. Now, what needs to be done to encourage innovations in green hydrogen sector across Africa, frontier Africa?
So green hydrogen, since it is let's say a new technology, and the costs are not yet very competitive, it is always important to start with intensifying research and development, innovation, and demonstration projects. These are usually financed by public-private partnerships because this is key for making sure the private sector is able to bring affordable technologies or that affordable technology into the market. The German-Nigerian Hydrogen Office, which you've mentioned, is part of our Global Hydrogen Diplomacy Program and is funded by the German Federal Foreign Office and is implemented by us in GIZ. And here in Nigeria, it is contributing to encouraging innovation through skills development and cooperation with academic and research institutions. But also it is helping Nigeria to create a roadmap and strategy in order to harness the potentials of green hydrogen in the country. Since 2021, we've carried out a series of workshops and trainings for different stakeholders in Nigeria, and we are also having a webinar series that are ongoing. Over the next few months, we plan on expanding our collaboration with the academic and research institutions as well as with public and private sectors. So we feel that there is great need to develop the capacity and the knowledge and the understanding of the potentials of green hydrogen in Nigeria.
Now, what are your major headwinds to sustainable energy transition in Africa?
Well, the sustainable energy transition, of course, is an agenda of countries. But close to a decade now, Africa, we have observed, are making great strides towards integrating renewable energy and clean energy systems into their mix. It's their national energy mix of different countries. I think examples are Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. But some of the major headwinds are the lack of infrastructure and the lack of access to financing on the continent. So an energy transition from our point of view, of course, will require a clear direction from the government as well as I had mentioned earlier, on private sector investments towards ensuring majorly on the African continent that no one is left behind. So basically, speaking about energy transition, in Africa, we are always first talking about energy access, since a large populace, depending on the country, still lacks energy access in general. Then, of course, making sure that the energy that is then given to people are sustainable and also in accord with the climate change action plans of different countries. So since energy access is a priority, we aim to support affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for all on the continent. Then the topic that we are speaking about today is green hydrogen. We have two programs on hydrogen in Nigeria. One of them is the Hydrogen Ramp-Up Program, which is supposed to support the private sector and the public sector in identifying public PPP projects, basically partnerships between private sector and public sector. And then we have the German Nigerian Hydrogen Office that I had mentioned earlier on, which is helping Nigeria understand the potentials for green hydrogen in the country and helping them strategize and create a roadmap in the coming years, both long and short-term goals, of course, in order to harness this opportunity.
And that's how we wrap up the show for you this week, and we hope you enjoyed the entire package. Don't forget to follow Energy Frontiers on Frontier Africa Reports website, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. It's goodbye from me, Justina Okechukwu, and I'll see you next time.